Welcome back to another episode of the Heart Centered Alchemist. I'm Dr. Lauren Davis. I'm your co host here with the Heart Centered Alchemist himself, Dr. Craig Wells.
Hey, everybody. So, what are we talking about today?
Well, I thought we could dive into a little bit about positive thought processes and how having a positive focus can sometimes be a little bit toxic.
I think the most important and the biggest distinction to make is between true nurtured positivity and saccharine sweet fake positivity, and where those two come from and sort of what they look like and how they operate. So, real, true, genuine positivity comes from inherent cohesion. So, all of the different parts of yourself being harmonious. And from that place of harmony, being deeply connected to that which we arise from. Most people are too fragmented, really, to have true positivity. And in some of my other materials and things, I talk about why culturally we are fragmented. But from that place of fragmentation, you'll have kind of different parts, and one might be happy, and one might be sad, and one might be pessimistic. And these different aspects have their own mindset. The most severe example of that would be like multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, where people are having profound physiologic shifts and profound shifts in how they talk, how they hold themselves, and sometimes even lapses in memory. So that's an extreme example of the fragmentation process. But to some degree, because of our culture and society, most of us have some degree of that going on. So we have all of this material that's under the surface. True positivity comes from the other than conscious mind. It comes from our spirit, our soul, and the deeper places inside of us. And fake positivity or toxic positivity, there's certain elements that makes it really pernicious and negative. And one is it's not nutritive. So it costs a bunch of energy to maintain. It's not something that flows easily and naturally. And the other big element to it is it comes from your personality, right? It's a conscious decision. It comes from your personality. This is more blunt denial. Hey, a tree just fell on my car. Well, in the moment, that sucks, right? You may have needed a new car. That car may not have been safe. It may be great that you weren't in that car when the tree fell on it. So it's important to recognize how we're feeling in the moment and work with what we're feeling in the moment, as opposed to what we would like to be feeling or what we think is socially acceptable or appropriate to be feeling. Because you can't cognitively force your emotions into a shape. It's like taking a spring that gets all bent out of shape and trying to straighten it back out with your fingers, right? At a minimum, you need like tools and a hammer and like the right skills and abilities to do it. And sometimes, that piece of metal that was a spring that had a function, once it gets so bent out of shape, you just have to melt it down and actually remake it from the beginning. So we can look at positive the same way. So people think they have to be positive all the time. And I'm all about the positive. I'm all about growing the positive. I think it's the most important thing in personal development and shadow work and all of the hot, topic, trauma, healing buzzword type thing. But when you're cultivating yourself, you do have to focus on the positive, but you have to focus on growing genuine positivity, because the toxic positivity, it comes from a place of superficiality, and you put a bunch of effort into maintaining it. So if you're having to say a bunch of affirmations every day, if you're having to repeat kind of positive phrases over and over again, or if you're having to medicate yourself to stay positive, I mean, these are indications that you're having some toxic positivity. Less so for men, but especially for women. There's a cultural drive to always be chipper, to always be positive, to always be pleasant. And that in the long term is damaging to your ability to actually connect with what you're feeling. And the first step of actually growing your positivity is connecting with what's there. And because there are positive things inside everybody, right? No matter how horrible of an existence you've had, there are positive experiences somewhere inside your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit that can be nurtured and grown. And the energy of those can be spread through your entire being to create a positive core or to create a link to the core, your essence that's already positive. So
So
that
how can we be positive without putting our own judgment on ourselves? Right? A lot of this sounds like when we try to be toxically positive, when we try to have positive thoughts, feelings, we're also judging another thought or feeling that we're having that's less than positive.
right, because we are the only species on the planet that we know of that has thoughts about our thoughts and feelings about our feelings and judges them as good or bad. So I think one of the first things to remember is if you have a feeling, you have a feeling. If you have a thought, you have a thought. It doesn't mean that you need to act on it. And it is what it is, but it comes from someplace. Once we have that positive core established and we're having positive thoughts some of the time, that's when we start tenderly investigating and working with through different meditational and energy and alchemical means to bring those less than positive parts into a state of positivity and unity and harmony with the whole so that you can have a heart-centered life. The heart feels a whole range of emotions. You as a human being, you feel a whole range of emotions. And one of the most damaging and damning things that we can do is to shove them down and hold them in and pack them tighter and tighter and tighter until we get little negative emotion diamonds. And that's what a lot of people do. I mean, this deeply affects our nervous system. It deeply affects our physiology. It's heavily associated with all different kinds of chronic disease and just in general unwellness. And it also tends to cause a numbness. Another element of this toxic positivity is numbing out. If you're not genuinely positive and you make yourself be positive, coercive, and forceful way, then you actually turn off your sense of acuity, not only to yourself, but you also turn it off to the world. You lose your ability to connect as deeply, especially to the people that care about us. We need to have a deep connection with our partners, our family, our children. In the poly community or the ethical non-monogamy community, they talk about the relationship escalator. And basically, we start out dating, we get progressively more intimate, and basically we fuse into one being. You have, identical thoughts, feelings, and everything. And that's an interesting concept for the relationship arena. But there's an interesting subtext within that idea of the relationship escalator as being a cultural phenomena that's promoted by monogamy, is that we miss out on the opportunity for sensitive and deep connection in the moment. So how many times have you had a deep conversation with somebody on a park bench or on a bus or something casual, right? That conversation can be deep and meaningful and it can change you and it doesn't have to go anywhere. The value of an exchange is not in how long you've been exchanging with a person, how nutritive that exchange is to both of you. And I think that's important just to enrich your life to kind of keep you open and connecting with people and having meaningful exchanges. But it's also really useful of a concept when you're talking about your relationships. They especially the Gottmans have done a lot of research on this, that more than anything, it's positive moments enforced daily and feel good daily that build stability in a relationship and make it meaningful and nurturing. And if you are in a state of toxic positivity, basically, there's not going to be any nutrition for you or anyone else in that interaction.
So, how do we get into a state of deep, meaningful connection and positivity with ourselves?
So, I mean, fundamentally, you're asking the question of, how do we get into rapport with ourselves? How
I
How do
mean,
we have a
for those people who have pushed down their emotions for a long time, for who haven't felt, who are numbed out, what is the first thing that they can do to start getting in touch with themselves?
I think really the first big step is to find something beautiful or find a place of sweet softness inside, to find something little, some little kernel of positivity. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Just being quiet and letting yourself relax and having the intention to do it is usually enough. And you just sit with that and you nurture it with your awareness. And yeah, there's ways to make it go faster, and there's ways to charge it up with different energy techniques. So I think finding something positive first, especially something that connects you into your inner wisdom, that can start helping navigating you, collecting all of the different pieces of yourself, I think is the most important. And I think that the fundamental thing in that is the intention and the awareness to keep doing it. And that's a big part of really elegant, efficient methods to do that in my program, the Inner Essence Cultivation. And really, I think that work of connecting and growing with your positive is so important, because that's what makes you truly human, right? The ability to connect with yourself, connect with the divine, and connect with other people. That is a fundamental aspect and piece of humanity. And it's a huge thing that brings us a ton of happiness and joy and meaning to our life.
So, talk me through how I would know that I am disconnected right now.
There's a lot of different clues for that. One is a sense of loneliness, right? So if you're chronically feeling lonely, if you feel like you're in a room of people and you're not connecting, maybe you're in the wrong room of people, they're not the people that you should connect with. Or maybe you're so numbed out that you can't. So there's a nervous system component, and there's an energy component that gives the emotional component to it. So it's easier for us to connect with people that are similar to us, the most like us. But I'll talk kind of more about that later, because we wanted to talk about what it feels like to be disconnected. So I think loneliness is a big key. And then any sort of discomfort. So are you having to do things like scrolling on your phone, especially when you're around people, to avoid discomfort? Are you, do you have to use substances and social situations? How comfortable are you being alone with yourself? So it's not as apparent people that you're around all the time, because you get in habitual patterns. But either in social settings with new people or when you're completely by yourself, if you're deeply uncomfortable, you're probably not connecting with yourself, and you're probably not connecting with other people, providing the environment safe. If the environment's not safe, then that.
So, if you could sum up what you think the current cultural cause of toxic positivity is, what would it be?
So I think where it starts in childhood is we do this for everyone, but we especially do this for women, is we are always trying to get kids to behave, right? We're trying to basically get the kids to be like demure. So healthy children, they don't have, developmentally, they don't have a lot of frontal lobe, right? So their ability to inhibit what they're feeling, it doesn't really exist. The impulse control is not really there. And you actually develop impulse control and emotional maturity much later than what you'd expect. Really, that process doesn't reach a full maturation, even though I think there is continued development after this point, until about 22 in women and about 25 in men. And it starts around 7-ish, plus or minus a few years, based on gender or whether you have ADHD, genetics, or that kind of thing. So we are bred for conformity, or we are cultured into conformity and trying to get along, right? So say you're sorry, don't act like that, smile, give your Auntie Willifred a hug who freaks you out.
Be a good girl.
Be a good girl. So that whole sort of be a good little boy, be a good little girl, shove your own feelings down is, I think, very damaging, that's not to say that you don't put boundaries on children, right? So you let them have their feelings, but you also try to get them to have their feelings in a way that's not like destructive to property or like hurt and stuff. But unless you let children actually work through their feelings, and a lot of parenting is counterintuitive. They don't really need solutions. Most of the time, the kids just need you to be there and like not be freaked out. So if you're a big ball of suppressed emotion and freaked out, like how effective is your parenting going to be? And then basically any feeling that they have is going to set you off like a tuning fork because you have all these powder kegs inside. And kids are great for this because they're like, yeah, I'll just have feelings. And they will set off everything that you have inside. So that if you've got a bunch of cooties, your kids will set it off.
So let's talk about how toxic positivity or thinking positively requires more than just a mindset shift.
So, mindset shifting, especially in the course of, a connected conversation. I mean, that's what brings people and communities and things together, right? It's a process through little shifts of building harmony, but you're shifting towards a reality, right? So if your mindset shifting, you should actually be shifting towards a connection with reality. So it's kind of like all the people that do all the money meditations that just kind of visualize money all the time, but they don't actually do anything to get money, right? They make the vision board. They see themselves in Tahiti, they see themselves with a goal, and they never take steps for it. So to make sure that you're not falling into toxic positivity, you have to make sure that you're reasonably connected to reality and how events are flowing in reality. So you have to be willing to take inspired action on the positive thinking that you're doing. If you're just telling yourself to be positive all the time, or telling yourself tomorrow will be better, or, I'll have this someday. One, you're not really working with sort of the structure, the mind and how it works, which using a lot of vague languaging and in your wants and desires and things, it actually tends to make them more difficult to achieve. But you have to kind of be realistic about the nature of the situations, right? Waiting for the fire to go out when your house is on fire, sitting on your couch, not a good idea. Like you go outside, you let the fire department handle it. If there's significant issues in your life, the right attitude and mindset can definitely help you get through them. But you do need to take action and make changes.
So this is something we talked a little bit about before. When we're doing that mindset work, if we go back to our island metaphor from our first episode, if we're changing the thought process of one part on an island, it doesn't necessarily spread between all parts of self. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Right. So if you're looking at more mainstream psychology, that the concept would be state dependent learning, right? Anything that you learn is essentially a belief about how the world works or how the world should work or how something should operate that has some degree of usefulness. So if you change things at a very deep level, that tends to radiate out to all of the parts that are connected. But if you're in a disconnected part, a lot of people only do things to make themselves more positive when they're upset. When you're really upset, especially if you're used to getting upset in a particular way, the particular body feeling in a particular context, basically there's certain neurologic structures and belief structures and energy patterns and thought patterns that only activate in that state. So if you tweak and modify those in that state, you're basically telling yourself that it only applies to that state. Overall, you're not making yourself more positive, you're not changing your beliefs. Most of the techniques for belief change, whether they be energetic or whether they be more meditational or whether they be more cognitive, they're done in a way that generalizes them. So a lot of the therapy and cognitive behavioral stuff, you do multiple times. You do it repeatedly in different times and places, and that sends the message to generalize. Neurolinguistic programming has a set of techniques where you actually generalize the changes through a visualized timeline. So your entire timeline, you actually see the changes applying and feel the changes applying through your entire timeline. If you feel one little spot of feel good, you have to circulate that all throughout your being, all throughout your body, all throughout your nervous system. So the process of generalization and anchoring and deepening and making things multi-contextual is really, really important.
And when you talk about the timeline technique, is it that timeline for that part? Is that the timeline of the entirety? Does the reintegration, re-expression need to happen before timeline work can do that for you?
So that's largely case dependent. So it would depend on how severely that part was disconnected. If you look at timeline or time technique approaches, or approaches where you're sort of visualizing a flow, a sequence of events, theoretically, if you go back to when that event was created and you desensitize that event and you repatterned it, theoretically, that should generalize forward if you encourage it, and it should basically automatically merge that part in. Sometimes you actually have to work in dialogue with the part. So that's where techniques like chair therapy come in, or different parts therapy approaches are very useful. One of the biggest approaches to parts therapy would be internal family systems. The person who came up with internal family systems actually studied with the same people, Fritz Perls, that parts concept and parts work into neurolinguistic programming.
Is this something that's included in your programs, or is this something that you do for your clients?
I have a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to how I work with people, and it comes a lot from my osteopathic training. I moved away from doing a lot of problem focused and a lot of negative focused things. One of the big tenets in osteopathy is to find the health. And one of the things that we do in energetic and spiritual osteopathy is we actually try to directly palpate what is good inside, what is healthy inside, the part that is connected to the divine. So if you think of all of these different parts of holographs of the whole, there's still a connection to the whole. And the other thing that I've kind of really tried to incorporate is actually building a positive core, right? Let's say that you have all of these islands that are spread apart, and you have to bring them back together. Well, if all you have is a little positive rowboat, then you're going to be rowing a real long time. But if you have, a big old powerful tugboat that you've basically built that is deeply positive, then you're going to get your parts together a lot quicker. And when you give the body resources, when you give it the ability, when you give it the pathway, the permission, and the resources to fix stuff, it just fixes stuff, and you don't have to consciously engage with it, right? The conscious mind doesn't need to be involved in and part of every aspect of your healing. And that's where kind of one of the issues, where the wallowers, where people that want to wallow in their experience all the time, where they feel like they have to be super cognitively connected to it. There are times when you do need to be cognitively connected to it. Like if you're repeatedly making bad partner decisions, you need to cognitively know what you're looking for in a good partner. And you also need to work with the unconscious aspects of yourself that are attracting you to bad partners, bad situations, bad business deals, that kind of thing.
If you could change one thing in your own personal development when it comes to positive thinking, what would it have been?
I wish that I would have had the technique that I developed recently that is the core of the Innocence Activation Program. I wish I would have had the core mechanics of that when I was like 12. It is so unique and so different compared to everything that it would have saved me so much grief and trials and tribulations and struggle and experimentation. Because it's a very interesting technique. It has energetic elements. It's positive focus. It uses the guidance of the inner wisdom to kind of zoom around and pick up all your positive parts and then harmonize them and generalize them so that it makes it easier to connect with the holographic wholeness and positivity within the less than positive, so that you can process things in a way that actually transforms and alchemizes and cycles energy instead of you having to spend all of your resources on getting to a good state.
And if I'm interested in learning more about this work, where can I find it?
You can find that on my website. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram. We do Facebook, Ask Me Anythings, and the Connection Correct. And there'll also be links to the Innocence Activation Program somewhere below this video, wherever you're watching it, or audio if you're listening to it.
Well, I think that wraps up this episode of our Heart Centered Alchemist. Thank you all for being here with us today, and stay tuned for our next episode.
Stay connected, guys.